From the deepest and darkest slums, where the endless sea of poverty and hopelessness swallow the dreams of the unfortunate and unprivileged, to the tallest of skyscrapers, where the chase for ambitions and aspirations is only limited by the capacity of one's moral compass, Night City is a cutting-edge technocratic dystopia where the weak are preyed upon, the corrupt rule the land, and only the strongest survive. The city was built on the dream of Richard Knight, the premise of establishing a utopia, the ideal city, planned to be a solution to remedy the inevitable collapse of both the social and economic sector, which he was certain would occur within a few years. The city would have to be safe, self-sufficient, capable of deterring even the most maniacal of criminals, governed by itself to ensure a totally free market economy, and have unique neighborhoods dedicated to preserving the unique feel of different nationalities and ethnic cultures. A free city for the people, and on the basis of this, the project would enter the planning phase. Just as Richard Knight predicted, when the banks and stock exchanges fell apart, investments and life savings evaporated in an instant, homelessness exploded as families collapsed and were torn apart, which resulted in immeasurable poverty, skyrocketing crime, and violence rose to unprecedented levels as a new depression set in across the entirety of the United States. The homelessness, combined with the outbreak of crime and violence, led to the death of an untold amount of people, and while the official count seems uncertain, it is known to have been in millions. With the depression fueling his motivation, Richard Knight managed to gather an unheard amount of capital to finance the project as the struggling corporations, looking and hoping to maintain a foothold in the crumbling economy, all flocked to the entrepreneur. The corporations were deeply interested in the potential of establishing urban areas free of crime, poverty, and debt, but even more important, the possibility of a free market with no anti-business legislation and government interference. By 1992, Richard Knight had partnered with huge companies such as Arasaka, IBM, and Petrochem, and all of a sudden, this mere dream of a free, thriving, and capitalistic paradise didn't seem like an impossible vision, but rather a matter of time and commitment. Searching for the optimal place to build his city, Richard Knight sent scouts to both coasts of the country, as a coastal city would drastically improve methods of import and export, allowing for a more diverse and vibrant economy. While the scouts reported several good locations, Richard Knight found an article in the San Francisco Chronicle that spoke of a ghost town called Morro Bay along the central Californian coast. The town had been recently abandoned by most civilians during the economic collapse, due to the sudden outbreak of a violent war between the police and local gangs. Richard Knight saw an opportunity and purchased the land that was now overrun with booster gangs. Through Merrill, Asukaka, and Finch, an exclusive investment and financial counseling firm, Knight bankrolled the Arasaka Corporation, a worldwide megacorporation primarily known for its high-quality, cutting-edge military-grade weapons production, to use its security assets to neutralize the roaming gangs in the area, allowing for safe construction of the city. It didn't take Arasaka long to do what they do best, and with the gangs gone, all Richard Knight had to do was to get rid of the bad reputation the area had governed through the violent massacres of the prolonged gang wars. Because of this, he decided to change the name of the area from Morro Bay to Del Coronado Bay. And with the stage of the preparation process completed, the construction of his dream, Coronado City, would finally commence in May of 1994. However, the major bankrollers of Richard Knight's project, Petrochem and Merrill, Asukaka, and Finch, weren't construction companies, which meant that the partnership had to look for their workforce elsewhere. Unfortunately, Most, if not all, unionized companies on the West Coast were controlled by the mob, either the mafia, the yakuza, or smaller organizations. This meant that logistics, constructions, and access to governmental and environmental agencies would all have to be done for the mob. With huge interest in the project, the mob was expecting to catch a huge return on investment by utilizing their construction and transport unions. But Richard Knight expected to use his own construction materials and schematics, thereby excluding a large number of established unions and companies partnered with the mob. This would immediately put him on bad terms with the factions involved in organized crime, who were all extremely displeased with his decision. At the same time, the groups of organized crime anticipated to establish themselves in Coronado City as the future owners of gambling, prostitution, and drug franchises, but this directly conflicted with Richard Knight's vision of a safe and crime-free city, which finally pushed the mob over the edge. Daily death threats would become part of Richard Knight's life for the next 4 years as the construction of the city progressed. However, as the threats didn't deter Richard Knight from proceeding with his vision, these threats would finally escalate to intimidation of the construction workers and direct sabotage of the construction sites. Refusing to back down, Richard Knight contacted his corporate partners at Arasaka, the mega conglomerate known for their swift ability to speak with violence and death, which immediately solved the issue, putting a ruthless end to the threats from the mob with direct intervention, so to say. With the promise from Arasaka that the mob would now be kept in check, Richard Knight was ready to continue the rise of the city. However, unfortunately, Richard Knight would be shot and killed in his newly constructed penthouse on the 20th of September in 1998. His killer, though never apprehended, was suspected to have been affiliated with one of the families of organized crime. In honor and memory of his death, the city council officially decided to change the name of Coronado City to Night City. Miriam Knight, the widowed wife of Richard Knight, would found Knight's Foundation, which would later be known as Knight Corp, and would continue to pursue Richard Knight's dream of the perfect city. However, over the next couple of years, the mob bosses who had orchestrated the assassination would slowly move into the city, where a long and violent war for territory began. In 2005, Night City saw a slow shift of governance and a severe decline in stability set in as the mob took over politically and became the dominant force in the Del Coronado Bay. The stable and harmonious setting of Night City slowly crumbled as the neighborhoods became a nesting ground for petty crime and drugs began flooding into the streets. By 2009, 4 years after the mob had taken over, the city was now saturated with violence, drugs, prostitution, and cybernetic terrorism. The mob ruled over businesses, the political sector, and law enforcement without any remorse or consideration to the well-being of the city's inhabitants. Gang activity was at an all-time high, and Night City would in this period of 4 years average more murders per capita than most cities would in 10 years, with the numbers of unsolved murders skyrocketing into the thousands. Watching their investments literally go up in flames as the influence of the mob and the explosion of crime slowly burned the city to the ground, the mega corporations finally decided to circumvent the corrupt politicians put in place by the mob and take matters into their own hands. The battle for Night City would now commence. The ruthless Arasaka-trained paramilitary troops converged on the poorly equipped mob, who might have been well suited for extortions, drive-bys, and small-time assassinations of civilians, but when faced with the cutting-edge mercenaries of the Arasaka Corporation, they crumbled like origami, raking up massive casualties over the following 2 years, losing their foothold within the city. By 2011, order had been restored within the city. a puppet mayor was put in place, and the newly elected city council deputized the corporate security forces, allowing them to act with full authority within the city. One by one, the corporate and business centers were restored, neighborhoods were cleaned up, and once again made livable. However, as the quality of apartments started to rise, so did the cost of living, with large parts of the population having been reduced to below or around the poverty line through the years of heavy crime. The increase in rent forced a large number of people out on the streets, massively increasing homelessness, as the apartments would now be used to house the corporate troops, maintaining order within the city. The city would undergo 9 years of progress from 2011 to 2020, where basic needs such as police, firefighters, and support services were re-established. By 2020, Night City was rapidly evolving, with its corporate sector booming in strong economic growth. However, though the mob had been crushed by the paramilitary corporations, urban violence and crime evolved with the city as well. Committed primarily by the poor, the starving, and the homeless that had been left behind by the lack of social safety net within the city, violence remained a major issue within the city's population. And while the Night City Police Department were able to keep the streets mostly safe during the day, they had to rely on the corporate paramilitary units during the night. And because of this, Night City had devolved into an armed society where people felt the necessity to carry guns to protect themselves, and rifles, shotguns, and pistols had become more common in the streets than briefcases. It would seem that the dream of a crime-free Night City that Richard Knight had envisioned was slowly drifting further and further away. Established as a free city, meaning that Night City was still under the flag of the NUSA, but had the authority to make its own decisions to abide by, ignore, or downright create its own laws to what it saw fit. This freedom would prove problematic during the Fourth Corporate War. In 2021, a global conflict would erupt when the underwater shipping company IHAG went bankrupt, as the two mega-corporations Sino and Otec would both try to force a hostile takeover of the corporation. The two companies acquired almost identical liquidity, which led to a slow buildup of tension between the two. In November of 2021, Otec struck first, sending a strike force to intercept Sino negotiators, trying to prevent them from attending acquisition talks with IHAG. And with this first stone cast, the wheels of the Fourth Corporate War had now been set in motion. With the two companies engaged in small-scale warfare, slowly raking up casualties on both sides, both determined to take over the remains of IHAG, none of them was about to back down. Struggling to establish a proper military foothold, they both decided to contact outside corporations, where Sino hired Arasaka to do their dirty work and Otec hired Militech. The decision to involve Arasaka and Militech would cause a ripple effect of political and economic implications, sending the conflict spiraling out of control, which led to all-out warfare between several corporation and government entities. After 2 years, in 2023, the violence would finally spill over and into Night City, where a large part of Arasaka's forces had chosen to withdraw as they were losing the war. And that was where Militech saw their opportunity to strike. On the 20th of August in 2023, due to an unresolvable conflict and constant warfare within the city, Militech considered Night City a lost cause and decided to pull out. However, in the midst of the withdrawal of their troops, Militech decided to send in an elite strike team led by a famous rocker boy and military veteran, Johnny Silverhand. This team would be tasked with hitting the very heart of Arasaka, with the intention of crippling the highly advanced reliquary database project. Militech's strike team charged the Arasaka Tower. However, the initial attack was abruptly stopped by Adam Smasher and his own forces, killing Johnny Silverhand in the process. Unfortunately, while the Militech forces had been neutralized, their plan had still been a success. Unbeknownst to Arasaka, at the 120th floor, they had still managed to deliver a small nuclear bomb, which in a blast as bright as the sun, detonated in the middle of the city. The explosion split the Arasaka Tower in half, obliterated the inner city, killed more than 12,000 people in an instant, and caused a minor earthquake that sank parts of the city in its foundation, causing severe flooding in the city center. As the bomb had been detonated at an altitude of 1,200 feet and the heavily reinforced tower had absorbed much of the radioactive material, the overall effects of long-term radiation had been drastically reduced. However, the deadly fallout of pulverized concrete, iron and steel would come raining down over North California, igniting thousands of acres in fierce firestorms. The majority of the remaining dust spiraled into the sky, turning it red for almost 2 years. This event would come to be known as the Night City Holocaust. Hey there, Hazmat here. That was part 1 and the story about Night City. Stay tuned for part 2. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more lore from Cyberpunk 2077, then make sure to let me know in the comments below. As always, a big thanks goes out to the Hunters Lounge on Patreon, specifically the exclusives, Johnny Sevens, the VIPs, Corvo Bearslayer, Derivative, Doc Powell, Gino Lucero, Goose, Jim and El Bob, Corey Peterson, Lion, Slip, Stas B. Aztec, and the Wizard of Copper, and of course, all the regulars. The Hunters Lounge does not only support me directly as a content creator, they also help me decide on future content, and you can join it for as little as $1 a month. Link is in the description below. And thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next one.